Their Stories Foundation presents Descendants, interviews with second and third generation survivors. Today's guest is Lea Wolinetz. Welcome, Lea. Tell me about your mom and dad and your family history.
Well, my parents both came from Poland, and they Paula Hudovich-Siegel came from a very middle class educated family in the town of Częstochowa, Poland, which is actually the center of Catholicism in Poland, which is really interesting.
Wow.
But there were about 40,000 Jews in the town. It's the third biggest city in Poland. And she was an only child, which seems to run in our family. um, and she had already graduated what they call gymnasium. She was already sort of almost in the first year of college because she went to a private school. And she knew English and she was going to be a lawyer. And she came from a family where they were all educated, not rich, but very middle class. And she had a huge family, and they were all either an engineer or a lawyer or a fashion designer, an engineer. And all of that, of course, was lost for the most part. She was in concentration camp in Częstochowa in a ghetto named Hasag Pelcera. And that particular was not an extermination camp, but it was a work camp. And she was part of the Judenrat. The Judenrat was something that the Germans had the more intelligentsia work for them in terms of what they had those kinds of things that they were just professionals, intelligentsia, and they were the younger generation, and they thought that they were going to save their parents by helping the Germans. This was every town in Poland had a Judenrat. Okay, and it started out to be a great thing and turned out to be nothing at all because my grandparents were sent to Treblinka in 1942, and my mother could do nothing about it at all. She actually wanted to go with them, and somebody hit her over the head and said, "Get on the other side." So I have a big history with her in Częstochowa because I'm the executive director of Częstochowa Jews, which is a world society. I have a big connect with Częstochowa through the years, a very big connect.
Wow.
So that was my mom. Okay. My dad came from a completely different world. And in Poland, that probably would have meant that they would have never in this world ever been with each other, because my father came from a very poor, uneducated, Orthodox family, and his mom died when he was 7.
Mm.
So his father remarried to what you call a real stepmother, which is always interesting because I'm the stepmother to 2 children, and but she was the real deal, yeah. And she threw out my father, who became a real behavior problem, and was a difficult child. I was a teacher for such a long time. I said, "Dad, you would have definitely been in special ed, no question." I mean, he did terrible things. He glued the rabbi's beard. He put cats in it. He was awful. So he was bad. He wanted attention, and that was it. And she hated him. So she convinced my grandfather to send him across the bridge from Stara Praga, which was a suburb of Warsaw, to the town of Warsaw, to to his aunt, who had 12 children and 2 beds. So she told my father, "You want to sleep in the bed, you have to pay for your place in the bed."
Wow.
He says, "How am I going to pay you?" She says, She said, "I don't know, and I don't care." So he walked around the streets of Warsaw and knocked on people's door and say, "Maybe you have a person that could work." And they said, "Yeah, who's the person?" He said, "I am." Well, obviously that was ridiculous, but somebody did take him in, and they taught him how to be a haberdasher.
Wow.
So when the war broke out, he was already married with a child. Actually served also in the Polish army, which has always told us the wonderful stories about his horse, Novinka. Shared always that, loved animals. But he, at that point, had a store in Warsaw that was a haberdashery store. So if you wanted your shirts to have initials, you went to David Ziegel, Zygil.
Wow.
And when I was in Poland many times, I have my citizenship in
Oh,
Polish.
that's
I
great.
went to visit the store.
Really?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Wow.
It was no longer haberdasher, but it was. I knew exactly where it was, and I
Wow.
called him from Poland. He said, "Yeah, yeah, that's it, that's it, that's it."
Wow, that's great. Do you know how far back your family history went? Do you know where
My parent. Well, I guess that I know about from stories. I guess the 1800s. My mother's family, my grandfather's family, Aaron Horovich, which is my grandfather on my mother's side. He came from Czestochowa, but her mother's family came from Bialystok, which was on the border of Russia and Poland. So their history went back, way back there in Bialystok. And I imagine that in the 1800s, my father, I would have no idea. I would have no idea. I knew much more about my mom's family, much
Yeah.
more.
And can you tell me a little bit more detail about her experience with the
My
Holocaust?
mom,
Yeah.
first of all, she was going to be 16 years old, beautiful girl, everything ahead of her. And then September the 1st, 1939, my parents, my grandparents, and my mom and the family were in the synagogue in Czestochowa, which is now in Czestochowa, the Philharmonic Hall. And I've had many, many events in that particular place. But the synagogue was called the Naya Synagogue, which was it was hired by German architects. So it was a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful building. And it's where my grandparents were married in 1919.
Wow.
Yeah, my mother said they had that's a story I'll tell you in a moment. But when they got married, my grandfather must have been in some sort of army, so they had it was a military wedding. My
Wow.
mother said it's really interesting, and I found when I was in Poland their announcement, their marriage announcement.
Wow.
And interestingly enough, my grandfather made my grandmother sign a prenuptial agreement. And I'm sitting in the halls of Czestochowa yelling at my grandfather, saying, "What do you mean you have a prenuptial agreement, Grandma? What does that mean? No, I can do that."
That's
But he
amazing.
had a lot of property, and it wasn't about my grandmother. I think it was about the rest of his family. I really do. I do. So that family was very, very strong with each other. And I had a great grandmother named Golda, and I'm I don't even know what they look like, John. I don't know what they look like. And that's always been a hard thing for me. I even went out to a thrift shop and bought a picture of what I thought might be my grandmother, which I have no idea what she looks like. And but I do know that she was taller than my grandfather. She was
Wow.
taller. Yeah. My grandfather was an importer of tea and coffee and chocolate.
Nice.
And my mother always had chocolate in her bag. Always. Mostly Goldenberg's peanut chews, if you remember that. If
Oh
you
yeah.
remember.
Yeah.
Always, always, always. And the war for her, she became the Judenrat. She worked in the Judenrat, but she also worked in the ghetto. They all worked in the ghetto. They all worked them. And she worked at night to make ammunition. Okay. And there's a story that I'll tell you about my dad with ammunition, and a story that will tie everything up to what has happened in my life. It's a good story. But there was a woman, for some reason, that had a child in the ghetto, which was rare. And the kid would cry all the time. So she asked my mother if she could switch places with her. So my mother would go at night so she could stay with the kid. So she worked in ammunition. They made ammunition, different things. A lot of people they used all kinds of chemicals in there, And she also did housekeeping. And one of the places that she had to clean, which were the Germans' offices, was her apartment. Yeah. So how her life did change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
I don't know if I gave you enough information about my mom, but do you have, is there anything else you wanted me to say about her?
I mean, what happened to her after, what happened
After
to
the
her
war?
after that? Yeah.
Well, they died, and my mother said they all knew that they were going to Treblinka, and they knew what was happening in Treblinka. They knew what was about to happen. Then she could do nothing, and her world fell apart. She didn't want to live really after them. And then she had another tragedy after the war, which I'll tell you in a minute. But she went on, and because she felt she was always a very bright lady, and all her friends would come to her for comforting. She was very smart. Even my friends in New York would talk to my mom. She was very progressive in her thinking. She was very progressive, and even my friends would come to her for advice.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
She said, she was talked about them coming on they would come on white horses to save them in the ghetto, right? And the Russians freed them on January the 16th, 1945. So
Okay.
my mother was hiding under a bunker at that moment because a colonel named Degenhardt was in the concentration camp, and her friend was his housekeeper. Okay. And he told them to hide under the bunker, and he was going to give them food. And if he didn't come for 3 days, they was going to come out, and they was in Chenstohova. They were in their town when they came out, and that's what happened.
Wow.
Okay, right. So the first stop near the ghetto when she came out was my grandfather's lawyer, who was not Jewish, to show you how progressive that family was. The lawyer was not Jewish, and my mother. He opened the door and he saw my mother, and he said to her in Polish, "You're Pan Horowitz's córka. You're Mr. Horowitz's daughter. What happened?" So she explained, and she was dirty, and and he said, "I can't let you in the house because maybe you're sick, and I have children." But his wife said, "You have to let her in." So
Was she alone?
she was with a friend. But her friend, who was also from Chenstohova, went to her house, and my mother was on the way to her house to see what had happened. So I guess they'd split at that point.
Right.
And the lawyer's wife took him in, and she said, "Give her a breakfast and give her a shower."
Wow.
And then she went to her home, which of course nobody was there. No one was there. No.
And then what happened? What did she do from there?
Well, then she moved in for a little while with
In,
5 of her friends who also lost everything.
in their family house?
Pardon?
In their family house?
They lived in my mother's family house.
Yeah.
She had a nice apartment. Actually, it was a nice apartment.
So a group of her friends
They
all
came there, right.
Okay. Wow.
And my father, on that end, I want you to remember. I want you to remember a name that I want to tie in with you. The name is Taubert. Taubert. Teubert. Okay. So he was the one who told her to stay under the bunker. Right. Okay. Now, so my father had a completely different story because, as I told you, he had a haberdashery store and his wife and a daughter, 5-year-old daughter. And he was in the Warsaw Ghetto. When the Warsaw Ghetto was blown up, his wife and his child died in that ghetto.
Oh boy.
So he was then alone, but there was no ghetto to go to. So they arrested him. Okay. And they sent him to a place called Skarżysko Kamienia, which is like, it was a work camp. And he was there for a few years. His main job was also ammunition and picking. They all did that. No matter what else they did, they all for the German army. And the other job that he had was to take the stones in the courtyard and pick it up and move it to the other side of the courtyard and put it down. I mean, it was just okay. So my father, when he first, what happened is the last year of the war, they sent him to Buchenwald, which was a big camp. And when he got there, he had two jobs. One was somebody asked him, because a Commandant Talbert, that name that I told you to remember, was looking for an aide de camp. He needed somebody to make his boots. So my father raised his hands because he didn't know how to make boots, but he raised his hands. Okay. And so he became very important to Talbert as my father. Right. He loved him, and he helped him a lot. So one night, when they were all doing ammunition, the Gestapo came in their black leather coats, and all those people that worked on the ammunition, they had to write down their names somehow, initial or something, that they were doing this, right? And of course, the Germans, who kept impeccable records, knew all of those people that were that particular round of work. And my father was there. That was it. He was there. So the Germans come in, and he says to him, David Ziegel. They said they changed the Ziegel to the Siegel because my mother didn't want me to be last in school. So when we got to America, she changed the Z to an S and the Y to an I, just because she felt like it, and because she didn't want to be last in school. Okay, that's the story. So I married a Wolinetz. What difference did it make? Okay, but anyway, but so here it comes Talbert, and he says to the Gestapo says, okay, Ziegel, hands up. You're going to the Himmel Commander. You know who the Himmel Commander is? The commander in the sky, God. Okay. And Talbot comes running out. He says, what are you doing with this Jew? He said, sabotage, because the bullets were put in backwards. Now, nobody knows if they did that on purpose or they were totally exhausted and who knows what they were doing. Wow. But whatever it was, they were accused of sabotage. Wow. So he saves my father's life. Wow. Okay. So you have Talbot there. He saved my mother's life. Okay. And then, I know that jumping to another question about how it affected me in the Holocaust, I will tell you that story then. I want to finish what happened with my parents.
Okay.
Then my father was freed of the war, finished, but he had another job. He had a job in a place called Kinderblock 66, which was where children like Elie Wiesel, Chief Rabbi Lau, there were 966 children saved. Wow. It was amazing. There was a movie by my friend Brad Rothschild. I actually was part of that film because my father's job was to take care of the children. And that's where he was saved in Buchenwald, because all of those children were saved. It's very interesting. Kinderblock 66, the people who were in it, Elie Wiesel was in there.
Amazing.
And Chief Rabbi Lau, who was 7 years old. Yeah. So my father was very proud of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how did your parents meet?
So that's my next. I'm on you. I'm on the trail. I'm on your path. Okay. So my mother is in Chenstohova. My father leaves Buchenwald, and in Buchenwald he met a person who came from Chenstohova, a friend, and they promised each other whoever would survive, whoever would survive would find each other's family, if there was family, to tell them, that they were good people or what happened to them. But my father had nowhere to go. My mother was in her house, and she was in good shape there. So my father buys a ticket to Chenstohova, which is about, I don't know, 3 hours away, 4 hours away exactly. And my father was a very funny man. He was funny. He had a picture of his friend and his family. So he doesn't know where to go in Chenstohova. So he's walking around the streets. It's a big town. And he's asking people on the street, maybe you know these people. He looked at them and said, I don't know who they are. The next person, I don't know who they are. I mean, it's a big town. Finally, he asked one guy, he said, listen, it's ridiculous. I have no idea who they are. But down the block on the Chech Alea, the third Alea, the street, there are 5 good-looking girls. Maybe one of them is the sister. So my father said, she has nothing to go lose. So he goes there, and guess who opens the door? My mother.
Wow. Wow.
She said everybody else was gone. She said she was home tatting. She was tatting. She said, do you know what tatting means, Mom? Yeah. I said, no, what's tatting? She says, it's embroidery. It's a tatting.
Oh.
I bet you Annette would know. I bet she would know.
Yeah.
It's like an old thing. And my mother said, my luck, I opened the door. What can I do? They were married 4 weeks later.
Oh my gosh.
They all did that after the war because they wanted to get on with their lives. They had to replace the people who were lost.
Yeah.
And my mother said, I don't marry you. I don't even know who you are. I'm not marrying you. And my father said, listen, you don't have anybody and I don't have anybody.
Wow.
We'll be together. My mother was beautiful. He was handsome as hell. Oh, is he gorgeous? He said, we'll make a family together. He lost his wife and his child. We'll make a family. And so they stayed in Chenstohova for a little bit. And then something happened in a town in Poland called Kielce. And the Jews returned, like they returned. Okay. And the people in the town put 165 Jews in the barn and burned them. So my mother said to my father, we're out of here because it's not safe to be in Poland anymore, which was a big problem for her because my mother was very attached to being Polish, a Polish Jew or Jewish. My father had no problem. He was Jewish and that was the end of it. My mother didn't even speak Yiddish at home at all. She spoke Polish, Latin, Russian. Okay, so she was not religious at all. And with the war, she was even less religious, losing everything. My father always kept his belief, always.
So where did they go from there?
Oh my God, that was a journey unto itself. They didn't have no idea where they were going. They became stateless people with 2 suitcases, and they went. And they went, I mean, there's so many stories I could tell you. You don't have enough time. I mean, all the way along, they went to Vienna. They were in Italy. And they couldn't get through the borders because the Russians were watching the borders. So they got them all drunk. And scores of people went through the night. And they went through the borders. Unbelievable. And they had nowhere to go. They didn't know where they were going. They got on a train. They became Italian workers, and they were all sitting in open trucks. My mother said she got a great tan. My mother had a great sense of humor. And they were sitting on the open trunk like this with big hats. And this guy comes over to them and he says to my father, Italiano? So my father says, see. So the guy says to him in Yiddish, it's funnier in Yiddish because he says to him, you're Italian like I'm Italian. And neither one is Italian. He says, but he put the pin on him that shows that he was Italian.
Wow.
But it was so funny. He said to him, you're Italian like I'm Italian. And not at all. Okay. But my mother, in the meantime, that train that they were on was manned by a Russian colonel. And he fell in love with my mother. And he said to my mother, who is that man you're with? She said, that's my brother. My father had a temper, honey. He had a temper. And he says, I'm going out to tell him I'm your husband. She says, good. Do you want to die right now? Because he's going to die right now if you tell him that. I said, you have to trust me on this, And he was in love with my mother. He was taking her to Moscow to meet his mother, whatever. So they decided, this is not going to work here. We better jump off the train. And they did. And they jumped right up into a cesspool on their way to Vienna. In a cesspool. Unbelievable. So they get to Vienna. And there's all sorts of stories about people they met along the way to help them. And there's millions of stories that I know, but
Yeah.
millions of stories.
And when did they come to the United States?
But then they all had to go to Germany. Everybody went to Germany. And I asked as a child, why would you go there? And she said, because that was our way out. The Germans were there, the English were there, the French were there, the Americans were there. So a lot of their friends went to, if you've heard of DP camps, of a DP camp. My parents did not go to camps. My mother said, I was in camp for 5 years. I'm not going to camp. I'm taking an apartment. She bought my father a motorcycle. She got pregnant and lost her first child.
Oh, wow.
That was the second biggest tragedy of her life. She said, I don't want to live.
Wow.
I don't have to, if I don't have children, I don't want to live. But she had me, obviously, and I was born in Germany. And that was, then they came to America. They came to America because they found a cousin, Tonya, who was a doctor who went to medical school in Italy. And she was away from them during the war. So she had, but she didn't know, my mother had no idea where she was. She didn't know, she figured she might have survived because she knows that she married another guy, a Russian guy, or another doctor. But she didn't know where they were. So she wrote a letter, my mother, because she knew English, to any Jewish organization. This is on the envelope. Help me. I have a cousin. Her name is Tonya Shemyatitska. That was her maiden name. I don't know her married name. She has a husband named Sienya. I don't know his last name. She has 2 children named Mario and Isabella because they named them. They lived in Italy, so they named the kids with China. But I don't know where they are. So everybody started laughing at her. They said, how are you going to find them? You don't know who they are. 6 weeks later, she got a letter from my cousin Tonya. They lived in Albany, and they were big friends with David Dubinsky, who was a huge labor leader. And they sent them the tickets to come to America. Wow. And we came February 1949.
And how old were you?
That's how we came to New York.
How old were you?
6 months.
6 months.
They did a joint, sent them clothes. So they sent my mother a snowsuit for a 4-year-old. So she stuck me in one leg and she wrapped me around. And they went on a which I wrote to you, on a luxury liner where everybody got seasick, including my father. And my mother and I and this old lady were in this elegant ship, and my mother goes out on the deck and she's holding me and she talks. First of all, that was February, so they had to go back to Hamburg because it was a storm. So when they finally got to New York, she held me to the statue and she said, take it.
That's amazing. That's beautiful.
Take care of my child. I don't know where I'm going. All those lights, they have a home. I don't have a home. I don't have a family. Please, Statue of Liberty, take care of my girl. Take care of my daughter. It's very meaningful to her to return years later with her friend Grace, who was a teacher. And of course, my mother was always involved with everything that has to do with education. She became a community leader. She was fantastic. And she spoke to the Statue of Liberty. She said, "You did a good job, lady. Everybody's fine."
Wow, that's beautiful. When did you first hear about the story? Do you remember when
Always,
it was always
always,
always part of your life?
always. I was an only child. Who else did they have to talk to? But that sounds silly, but they were always, all of their friends were Holocaust survivors. All of their friends, all the time. Parties, 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 parties. Always. But who was going to understand them except each other? What
Did
they'd gone
you
through.
what do you remember, like, when you finally had an understanding of what the Holocaust was? Do you remember how old you were, or
I don't
was
ever
it,
remember not knowing.
so it was sort of a gradual, just organic part of your
It was
life?
an organic storytelling, and my mother could relive all of her stories through me, and my father could really, that was cathartic for them to I mean, I didn't
Yeah,
quite understand, and to be quite honest, I still don't. How could anything like that have happened?
yeah. Did
No,
you
no.
did you see any trauma in your family or in your?
Oh, absolutely. My father had terrible nightmares,
Yeah,
and my mother, she had a wry sense of humor. You know, it was very. She had a problem with the religion thing. It bothered her a lot. But my father was very nervous. He had a fight with my mother once, and something or other, and he threw a radio out the window. I mean, yeah, he had temper. He had a lot of that. A lot of that. My mother tempered it with being intelligent and reading, and and doing community service, and she tempered that. But in 1960, the cousin that brought us to America died suddenly. She was not old, and she had cardiac problems, which seems to be in my family for sure, because my mother had open heart surgery too. I saw my mother in a way that I never saw her before. She was completely, she was banging her head against the couch. You took everything away from me. You finally found my peace in my family. Everything away from me, everything. And I saw how damaged she really was. It was frightening as a child. I was in the sixth grade. It was
yeah.
frightening.
So she
It
was
was
just
frightening.
it took another tragedy, another trauma to
Right,
bring out
right, right,
that
right.
she was probably repressing to some extent.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And she always, yeah, that's right.
Did she understand any of that? Was there an understanding that it was trauma, that was, that their life was hard because of it?
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course she understood. My father took a different approach. My father used to say, Lila, because that's my Jewish name, Lila, little Leah, right? Everything is up. I said, well, what is that supposed to mean, Daddy? He says, the worst thing already happened to me. Everything is up.
Right.
Everything is up. So one day we're in our apartment in the Bronx. I was a teenager already, I mean, a young adult. And my father comes marching out. That's the wrong word. Walking out of the room with a pair of Bermuda shorts. And I'm looking at these shorts. I said, Daddy, what is that? He says, that my Bermuda shorts. I said, okay. They look like your outfit from Buchenwald. There's the stripes. So he looks at me and he says, you're right. I said, why did you do that? He said, because I can, and I did, and I can do what the hell I want. He used to actually do another word. Because I made it and I can do it. I can do it. And that was my father.
No.
That was my father.
Oh,
Always wanted to go ahead and do things. You
yeah.
know, I wanted to buy this store, and he wanted to buy a house, and he wanted to do this. My mother was always, she couldn't move. She stayed. That I'm sure is part of the trauma, you
Yeah.
know. Yeah, I'm sure that was part of the trauma. Now that you asked that good question,
Yeah.
she couldn't move. She was
Yeah.
afraid. Everything was good. Whatever she had was good. She didn't have to have better. She didn't have money. She didn't have to have jewelry. She didn't have clothes. She didn't have to everything. Everything was fine with her
Yeah.
because
She just
money
wanted
is
to
in.
be
Pardon?
she just wanted to be content. She wanted to be safe and content. And your dad wanted to take every advantage of what he had. So
Correct.
maybe they balanced each other out pretty
I think they
well.
did. I
Yeah.
think they did.
Yeah.
They were married for 63 years. They did.
Oh, God bless.
And yeah, I think that's what it was. Yeah, and I fell in somewhere in the middle. I think I don't know.
You feel any of that trauma yourself? Did any of it come through to you, do you think? Did you have a hard
The
time?
trauma for me has always been the lack of family,
Hmm.
and now as an older person, I feel that even more. And I was an only child.
Right.
To this day, I mean, I have two insane second cousins. I think I can't even. I can't. I have one second cousin who's a psychiatrist, so she's hard to talk to because it psychoanalyzes me every time I speak to her. That's annoying. That's it. That's it. That's where the
So,
trauma bothered me, and
yeah.
hurt me. It hurt me that they hurt my parents so much,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I couldn't fix it.
There's nothing you can do about it. There's nothing, well, you can live a good life and you can take part in the education and the sharing of the story and you
Oh,
know
for sure.
keeping their memory alive is incredible. Um, do you take your role as a second generation survivor? Do you take that seriously?
I take it very seriously. You know that, John.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay. Now, so
I
this is
know
the
that.
time to tell you about Talbert.
Yeah, back to Talbert.
Yes, very important. Okay. In 1997, I started an adoption program for older children. And it was to provide families because I felt that every child needs a family. I had my son after my second marriage at 41 years old. So he was about 7 at that point. And I realized I obviously wasn't going to have any more children, but I didn't want him to be alone. He did have two step brother and sister who lived with us. It was a family, but they were much older than him. So I contacted this agency, and it didn't turn out right. But I got friendly with the lady who ran the adoption agency, and we started a program called the Golden Bridge of Friendship, which was my nonprofit, where we brought older children here from Russia and Kazakhstan.
Wow.
And the first year it started it's 25 years ago. So what is that? Was it 1997 or 2005? There were two different things. I don't remember what was. Anyway, that program became so successful that it still stands today, John. And if you look at an organization named KidSafe, they now bring children not from Russia and Kazakhstan anymore, from Colombia, from Guatemala.
Wow.
I've brought thousands of children here who don't know who I am, but they have families. And I wanted to honor the 1.5 million children that didn't make it.
That's beautiful.
My mother used to call me the Jewish Mother Teresa.
Well, thank you for doing
Look
that.
up KidSafe. So that's how I use their
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah.
Okay, now
That's okay. And
It's amazing. It's amazing. It's still amazing. And now
what
they have so much. They do fostering. Look them up. Kids Save.
I will.
Kids Save. But one of the families, what my job was, besides finding the people, was my home, which I invite you to all the time. It's a huge farmhouse, and the kids would come, and I would introduce them to their prospective parents. So one family comes, and his name is Mr. Talbert. And I thought I was going to fall off the chair, but I didn't say anything yet. His wife's name is Heidi. And they had already adopted a child from Russia. This would have been the second child. I said, Mr. Talbert, I'm sorry to ask you this question. Is that a German descent? And he said, yes. And I said to him, that name is familiar to me. Now, my parents at that point had moved into my house. So they were there. I said, we have a story in our family about a Commandant Talbert. And he looked at me with a straight face and he said to me, that was my uncle. I said, what do you know about him? He said, it's of great shame that we have a Nazi in the family. We know it. She says, my sister almost killed herself because she was so upset knowing that we had an uncle. And she said, and they didn't know him because he was in Germany, and nobody, by the way, knew what happened to him after the war. We don't know.
Right.
So I said to him, I'm going to do the biggest favor for you that you've ever known. I said, I'm going to introduce you to two people who will tell you, yes, he was a Nazi, but he saved individually their lives individually. They didn't know each other. They went to different camps. One was in Buchenwald. My mother was in Chenstohova. He says, where are they? I said, they're in the house. So I knock on the door. I said, Ma, Kermit. She said, what? Are you kidding? I said, no. I said, you want to talk to him? He says, of course I want to talk to him. I want to make him feel better.
Oh my God. What a
Now you think about that one for a minute.
that is
You blow
amazing.
your mind out because
Yeah.
if it wasn't for what happened to them in those two camps, and I wasn't born, he wouldn't be standing at my door. He wouldn't be adopting a child from Russia. None of this would have happened.
It's unbelievable. It's really unbelievable.
It's unbelievable.
It's
Yep,
it's it's a beautiful story, and it's it really makes me feel like, kind of, you know, fulfilled in my belief of a higher power. You
absolutely.
know,
Because he was in their room with them for 2 hours. And they all came, like, in Yiddish, you say, to flush it, their hair was, everybody was crying because he felt like finally he could at least think about him in a way that was not horrible. And they were happy to tell him
yeah,
he was Nazi, but look, he saved us. He saved us. And if it wasn't for us, we wouldn't have had Leah. And if it wasn't for Leah, you wouldn't have your child.
yeah.
They were happy. See, those are my parents. A lot of my friends' parents would have never done that, John. Never, never, never. They would
Wow.
hold hate. They would hold it. They
Right.
would hold it.
Did you experience anti-Semitism when you were growing up?
No, other than somebody once in the fourth grade came and told me that I killed Jesus. And I said to him, I didn't kill Jesus. He's in our classroom because we lived in a very Spanish neighborhood by then, and we had a kid named Jesus. Jesus, that's what he was talking about. I said, what do you mean? I didn't kill Jesus. It's right here. Okay.
Wow.
No, but I maybe I did, but it was nothing traumatic to me like that.
Yeah.
I have to say, I always knew that I was Jewish, who I was, and I mean, I've been to Poland 10 times. I know what that feels like. where the groups of people are pointing at you, that I know it exists, but I can't say that I ever felt it. Maybe it's because I lived in New York. I don't know. I don't know. I can't say that it did.
Yeah. Does it affect you in any way today, like nowadays, in present day,
Yeah,
like like that it's still happening, that there's still
of
anti-Semitism?
course it can still happen. My mother always said that. My father always said it. Of course it can still happen because hate takes over all the time.
Yeah.
Takes over all the time. But you have to be like my dad. I had to say the worst thing already happened, and so everything else pales by. I didn't say pales by comparison, but and it can, but it can always be, and everything. If I complained about something, it can always be worse. It can always be worse. Don't complain. It can always be worse.
Do you think it's just ignorance? It's just, you know, lack of education, or lack
Yeah,
of or
it's lack of education. It's fear.
lack of being
It,
exposed to Jewish people,
yeah,
or
it's fear. It's fear of what that they really believe maybe that we do kill Christ. How can I, especially in the Hispanic community right now that's coming in, they know so little. They're not educated about
they,
it at all.
they don't even know that Christ was Jewish.
Oh no.
I mean, that's like,
Yeah, they don't.
it's just,
Because the father in their small parishes in Guatemala, they no.
yeah,
That would be a terrible thing to think that he's Jewish. That's crazy.
yeah,
I know. So education is important.
yeah.
I have some ladies that come in once in a while that help me clean the house. They sit down all the time. They tell me the story of Jesus. Porque Jesus es un judeo. I said, sí, es un judeo. Como yo. Yo soy judea. Yeah. I think education is something. And there's an underground hate, and Jews are perfect scapegoats. Perfect scapegoats. I worry about my grandchildren. I worry about my children. I worry about that. But I'm like my dad. Like my dad.
Yeah, just got to keep going, right? Got to keep.
It'll their lives have always, all lives, every generation has had that in one form or another. Nothing is as violent as in my generation. I had Vietnam, we had all that stuff. But I can think it can always be better. I have to think that. I have to think that.
Well, this has been a wonderful discussion. I'm so grateful that you shared your story with us. It was a beautiful story in a way, and it's also a very sad and tragic situation that. But here you are, and we have Talbert to thank.
It's Howard. Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
And it's an amazing story. I tell people, they're like, oh, wow. But I've done lots of things. I'm involved with Rutka now, Rutka the musical, which tell the story of a girl in Benjin, diary. I'm involved with being the executive director of my chat. I'm just always whatever I can do to help is why I feel my parents survived,
yeah,
and why
yeah,
I was born.
mission driven. Yeah.
It's it.
Is there any other thing you'd like to say? Any thoughts you'd like to bestow upon future generations or people that are watching?
It's always important to you remember your past, but it's not something that you shouldn't hang on to that. You actually have to just be in the moment. You can't worry about the past too much, and you can't worry about the future because we don't know that. We only know what's in front of us at the moment, and to make that gratitude and what life has given us at that moment, but never to forget the past. Never, never, never. And don't erase anything that has to do with the past, like books or cultural things or history. No. And don't put too much stock on the future because that will come by itself and you will be part of that future. So that's what's important. I mean, it's to me when I talk to my 14-year-old granddaughter, she'll say, "Grandma, what is that you're talking about?" And I said, "You don't even have to understand that yet, Phoebe. You do not. You just enjoy your life and wear that crop top even higher so they become under your nose." I said, and you be the wonderful Fibula that I love and adore, and you enjoy every moment of being 14. I said, and you don't worry about any of that stuff because you got plenty of time. Oh, Grandma. I said, what? She said, I love you, Grandma.
Oh, that's sweet.
I have 4 beautiful grandchildren. 4. And they're not even my grandchildren. They're my step-grandchildren, but they're my grandchildren. They're beautiful. So I'm going to mention them now because I love them all and I don't want them to feel left out. There's Rory and his sister Eve. And there's Phoebe. And then her brother Eli. Eli is Eli David, named after my father.
All nice names. Very nice names.
Very nice.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks for mentioning them. And
Or should I mention my children?
yes, mention your children. Mention your
I'm my husband, Alan. Okay, the whole world. Because
Alan,
that's all I have.
dog.
John, my husband, Alan. We're married almost 40 years. As a second marriage. That's what I hope that's a big deal. And
Children.
he's a nice guy. And 3 children. There's Jeff and Andrea and Alex.
Nice.
My life, my world, my family.
Great. Beautiful. Well, thanks again. This has been wonderful. And all the best to you and your family. I really appreciate you
I
sharing.
do okay. Even I have laryngitis. I probably saved you from a lot of other talking and listening because I had laryngitis. I can't even talk that much. But I think I hope I answered your questions.
Thank you so much.